Thank you so much for joining me on WOW's YouTube channel. My name is Sasha Reade, and today I've got a really fun tutorial where we're going to use chunky embossing powders, and I'm going to give you 3 ideas of what you can do with them and how you can make them into some beautiful backgrounds. We're going to dive straight in, and the first one we're going to do is using stencils. I've got this new quad release from WOW, which is the Citrus quad, and they are an orange, a yellow, a green and a red, and they are gorgeous, but they are very chunky. So I thought it would be fun to give you some inspiration on what you can do with chunky embossing powders so that you get the most out of them and really see all that glitter and shine. So the first thing I'm working with is a stencil, and I've got a nice big open stencil. This isn't a fine detailed one. This is a fun kind of spotty background, and I'm using this Tacky mat from Lisa Horton just to hold that stencil in place so that when I squish my ink pad over top of it, it doesn't wiggle about. It's quite easy to clean off the little stencil mat after when I'm done, so I'm not worried about going over the edge at all with it either. So all I'm doing is pressing down my ink pad nice and firmly and getting ink transfer through the stencil where those holes are. So you can see here I've got loads of ink down now, and so now I can apply my embossing powder. Now you could just put one color over the whole entire thing, but I am going to use all 4 colors because I like how they all look together and I like that kind of mini rainbow look to them. So I'm doing one at a time. I'm sprinkling it on, tapping off the excess, making sure I get that glitter moving around while I'm putting it down, and then I'm moving on to the next color. So I am tipping out the excess straight back into the jar that it came from so I don't end up with mixing up too many colors or wasting any embossing powder. Once I've got all 4 colors on, what is really important to remember with glitter powders is you must heat from behind. If you don't heat from behind, you will blow a lot of that glitter away before the embossing powder has time to grip it and set it in place. So you can see here it's very sped up, but I am heating from behind. I'm making sure not to burn my cardstock. It's really difficult for me to film this because my heat gun gets quite close to my camera, and when my camera gets too hot, it just turns itself off. So I have to be quite careful. When I'm done heating from behind, sometimes I like to just pull it around to the front and heat it from the front just to final set all those little bits of glitter. But you get this gorgeous background. You really get to showcase those embossing powders and see all that glitter and sparkle. Now I'm going to add an extra stamp onto this one because I had an idea in mind of how I wanted to finish it off this card. So I'm going to lie that into a stamp platform so I can do this a couple times. And I'm going to pick up my stamp, add some normal embossing ink on top. Normally I like to work with black embossing ink when I do this, but this time, because of all the texture and the color, I'm going with clear ink, and I'm going to add on the black embossing powder to the top. So this time I can just heat set from the front because there's no glitter inside this embossing powder, so I don't have to worry. And when I was finished, I felt like it wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it to be, so I popped it back into my stamp platform, gave it a second round, and thickened up those lines and sharpened up that black color. Now I'll finish off this card towards the end of the video, and you'll see how I created a whole entire card out of it. So our second method that we can use to really highlight those powders is to use embossing folders. I've got 2 different samples here to show you of how you can apply your ink to them. So one is going to use a brayer and one is just using the ink pad if you don't have a brayer. Now I've chosen embossing folders that have quite a good surface space on them, so that when I sprinkle down my embossing powder, I have got lots of kind of space for that color to be shown through. So I've run this first one through. These are 3D embossing folders, so they raise quite high up off your cardstock. And all I'm going to do is go direct from pad to paper. So I'm going to just squish down my ink pad. I did start by rubbing my ink pad on, but it's not the best thing for your ink pad. It does kind of wear down the surface a little bit, so I would suggest kind of dabbing it on rather than rubbing it. Again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to just do strips of color all down my card, and then that way I've got that kind of beautiful rainbow look going on as well. Now, because I squished and rubbed quite a lot, I did get a lot of that embossing powder inside the textured lines. So it's not as clear as it would be if you use the brayer, and I'll show you that difference in a minute, but it still looks cool. You've still got multiple textures going on, and I can trim up those edges nicely so that they're a bit clearer around the edge. So for this one, I am taking my ink pad and I am brayering into it and brayering onto my card. And this way you can see here, you get a lot more definition from that embossing folder when you do it with a brayer. So it depends on what you've got in your stash and what you can do, but it's another way that you can showcase these embossing powders and get that glitter and shine really showing through. Now our third way is to use dies. So we are going to make some panels of color and then die cut out of them so that we've got nice big shapes in those colors as well. So I've got some cardstock here and I'm simply going to squish down some of my embossing ink onto the background of it, and I'm probably squishing down ink to cover about 3/4 of my cardstock, and then that way I get a nice big panel and I can do several die cuts from them. So through the magic of my computer, they are all done and ready for you in all 4 colors, and you can see all that glitter showing through. I love it, it's so sparkly. These are the dies I'm using for my cards. I've got some circles, I've got these kind of circly wave dies, and some hearts. So the first card I made, I just cut up 3 circles, glued them down on my card, and then grabbed a pre-made sentiment from my stash and just stuck that on the top with a bit of foam tape. And you can get a gorgeous simple card in no time. For this one, I made a little embossed background, and then I used that wavy die and left the outside edge off, and you'll see the next card's got the outside edges. So there they are. I just kind of stuck them all on together on some holographic card and stuck a sentiment in the middle. Now for this one, here's that one from the original one. I trimmed it down a little bit and then added a sentiment to the bottom where my flower didn't quite reach all the way to the bottom. These are the ones I've got left. I've got like a beautiful little cute heart, and I've got my little panels that I can trim down and use as backgrounds for some cards in the future. So I hope you enjoyed these 3 different ways that you can use those embossing powders and really highlight that sparkle and shine, because sometimes I get really frustrated when I've got a gorgeous embossing powder but all my stamps in my stash are really detailed and fine, and my brain is just struggling for what to do with these embossing powders. I hope that this helps you. I hope that this gives you some inspiration on what you can do with those gorgeous powders, and if you've got some that are just sat in your stash doing nothing because you don't know what to do with big chunky embossing powders, hopefully this will give you some inspiration and you can get cracking. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a fabulous week ahead. Take care and see you next time.